On February 10th, 2012, my grandmother, who had been battling liver cancer for about a year, took her last breath and laid to rest in the comfort of her own home, surrounded by the love of her family. It's all still so fresh in my mind, and I can't even believe that she's gone. I can still remember the Christmas of the first year I started teaching. My grandma handed me a present, and I couldn't wait to see what it was. I opened that little blue box with anticipation. "An apple," my grandma said, "because you're my teacher." All I could do was smile. As each holiday and birthday pass, I sit back and I wonder how will we ever do this without her? As soon as the bell rang at 3:02 p.m., I packed up my laptop, ushered my students out the door, locked up my classroom, got into my car, and drove almost an hour to get to my grandparents' house in Castroville, California. I had almost reached the exit when I got a call from home on my cell phone. I scrambled to get my earpiece in, and I was eager to hear what my parents had to say. I remember hearing my dad's voice, and immediately my heart started to race. It's not common for my dad to be the first voice I hear when my parents call, so I knew it was important. He had asked me if I had gotten to my grandma's house yet, and I told him that I was exiting and I would be there in about 5 minutes. He then proceeded to tell me that his sister had called him and had told him that Grandma hadn't eaten since breakfast and she was no longer responsive and opening her eyes when anyone called her name. He then asked me if I could assess Grandma's situation and make the call whether or not they should make the trip down that evening. I didn't see many cars there yet, but I knew the others would be at the house as soon as they could. By then it was nearing 5 p.m., which is prime time for commute hour. I went inside, kissed my grandmother on the cheek, and I greeted her like I normally did. "Hi, pretty girl," I said. My heart sank when my grandmother just laid there, sleeping. She did not respond, just like my dad had said. Before my emotions could get the best of me, I quickly asked my aunt, who had worked for many years as a nurse in the pediatric oncology department, what was going on. I will never forget how I felt the moment she explained to me that Grandma probably wouldn't make it more than 48 hours. I gathered myself and walked outside to call my dad to let him know that he and my mom needed to drive down to my grandma's house as soon as they could that evening. I walked back in the house with a feeling of helplessness. Once my mind was clear, I knew that I had to pull myself together so that I wouldn't scare anyone when they arrived. The first of my relatives to arrive was my aunt, uncle, and 2 younger cousins. As time passed, my parents had arrived, and then my other cousin and her boyfriend. The last to arrive was my best friend. He had made the effort to ensure me that he would be there that night since it had been months since the last time he had seen my grandparents. The whole time I sought comfort by talking to my boyfriend, who hated the fact that he was too sick to be there to show his love and support in person, but reassured me that if at any moment I needed him, he would be there. Around 9 p.m., my parents made the decision and announced that they had to go home. They didn't want to leave, but my dad had just gone through chemo earlier that morning, and the effects were making him sicker and sicker as each hour went by. I remember sitting there holding my grandma's hand with my right hand, and making sure that my dad was feeling okay with my left. My heart felt like it was breaking into a million pieces. I tried with all my might to fight back my tears, but the moment one of my aunts looked at me, it was at that moment when I broke down, sitting there in my chair, silently crying to myself. After my parents had left, I felt so lonely. Even though my other family members and my best friend were there, I felt so alone. So many thoughts were racing back and forth through my head, and the only thing I could do at that moment was sit down and just type out my thoughts on a Word document. I had reached a moment where my head was clear, and I remember getting up and talking to my cousin about something. In mid-conversation, I saw my uncle run past, calling my grandpa's name. "Frank! Frank!" he said. I immediately stopped what I was doing and ran to my grandma. I stood there speechless, with tears in my eyes. When everything registered, I got on my cell phone and immediately called my mom. All I remember is begging her to come back. I walked to the other room and I begged her to turn around and bring my dad back. I remember telling her that he had to be there. He had to be there that night. He had to be there on the night that his mother was finally resting in peace. She stayed on the phone and cried with me, and reassured me that things would be okay, and that if my dad felt better, they would be there in a heartbeat. But my dad was just too sick to turn around and drive back. I dropped to my knees, and as much as that hurt to hear, I understood. At that moment, I felt the strong embrace of my best friend hugging me from behind. I got up off of the ground, walked into my grandparents' bedroom, and called my boyfriend. I tried to speak, but there were no words coming out of my mouth. He knew. I didn't even have to say one word, and he knew. He told me that all he had to do was get his things and he would be on his way. The moment he showed up and I was in his arms, I had a moment of peace and clarity. I knew that things would be okay, and I knew that my grandma was in a much better place, and she knew that she was loved. That night I started a poem with the thoughts that were running through my head, and it is now complete. This poem was my way of telling my grandma that I love her and that it was okay to finally be at peace. On the day of my grandma's funeral, I stood in front of everyone, and this is what I read. My granddaughter's love. There are no words that can express just how I feel inside. I try so hard to mask these tears, but no longer they can hide. To sit here while I touch your hand and know that you hold on. With every breath that you have left, my love for you stays strong. I dread the day you have to go, but know it's for the best. You've had the life I long to live. It's time for you to rest. There will be good days and some bad. It will take some time to heal. But deep inside I know you're home, so let the light reveal. You will never be forgotten and never be replaced. There will always be your memory in my heart, a safer place. For as long as I can think of, you've held this family up. From birthdays down to barbecues, you've never given up. You've cheered me on at school events and held your head with pride. Watched me grow as each year passed, glad you were by my side. Now the time has finally come, my heart it is at peace. Just know that you'll be missed and loved, to say the very least. I love you with all my heart.